Dusty, have you ever gone on a hunting trip?
Well, yeah.
You pack all your stuff. Let's say you're driving to New Hampshire. Let's say I'm driving to Ohio, and you're hunting for 4, 5, 6 days. What's the biggest challenge you usually have?
You're going to stop multiple times to get gas, and I worry about odor the whole way.
It's always in the back of your head. After talking to our friend Tim Gothier, we realized that there's a better solution that is portable. And that solution is called the Scent Lok Enforcer. This nifty little device, about the size of an iPhone, it produces ozone. Ozone is this naturally occurring O3 molecule that actually naturally removes odors, kills bacteria, binds to all kinds of odor particles in the air, and basically makes you scent-free instead of like a scent cover-up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
You can put this in your tote. It operates off of a USB and has an 8-hour battery life.
It's the personal ozone generator.
It is the personal ozone generator. If you want to check it out, go to scentlokenforcer.com. That's SCENTLOK Enforcer.com. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 169. Nick Pinizzotto, the National Deer Alliance, and a buck named Second Chance. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Scent Lok Enforcer, the Euro Hanger, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey guys, this is Dan Bass with Coon Archery, the timeman and inventor of the Hang-On Helper. You're listening to my favorite show. It's about to be yours, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is Mark Stuckbauer from Stella Step. You and I are about to listen to the only, the best, the number one podcast out there if you want to talk deer hunting. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hi, this is Tim Brent, commercial real estate broker at NAI Carolantic Realty in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you are about to press play on my favorite deer hunting podcast, Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. My name is Jay, and I want to say thank you from everybody here at Big Buck Registry Podcast Studios for joining us and tuning into the next hour of deer hunting, because that's what we love to do here. We talk deer hunting nonstop, and we go out and we find some of the greatest deer hunting minds on the planet, and we corral it here and bring it to you and deliver it in a podcast format so that we can all benefit from the knowledge of some of the greatest deer hunters on the planet. And one of my favorite deer hunters and one of the best deer hunters I know is with us right now, our co-host, Dusty Phillips. How are you, Dusty?
Great. Thanks for the kind words, Jay. And man, I tell you, I really enjoy the whitetail woods, but as I'm talking right now, Saturday morning, I'll be in New Hampshire woods.
And we're not chasing whitetail. We're chasing turkeys and bear.
Absolutely. I can't thank you guys enough for having me up, and spur of the moment, flying out Friday. Like I said, as we're talking now, I'll be in the New Hampshire bear woods.
It's exciting. We tried this a little bit last year. We were a little bit late. You're much earlier this year, and I think your chances of success will go way up because of that. So very excited to have you back in town, and hopefully we can come see you down in Ohio at some point in the near future too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to invite everybody to fill out a survey that we're doing. We're trying to get a profile on who is listening to the show. It's only 5 questions. I've done it. Dusty, you've done it. Very simple. All you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/survey, fill it out, and it lets us know who's listening to the show, and then we can use that to create better content. So if you get a chance, bigbuckregistry.com/survey. Dusty, I do have a letter that was sent in from a guy by the name of Seth Davis, and we like to read letters that are sent in, and I'd like to read this for you. It says, guys, great podcast. I recently started listening and have been cruising through the archive like crazy. I love the deer hunting news and the general format of the show. For years, I carried a bottle with me in a tree stand in case I needed to relieve myself. I like to sit for long periods of time, so peeing at some point is unavoidable. Last year, I read an article that stated that deer can't discern between deer and human urine, and I actually made a couple of mock scrapes that were visited frequently using the scratch and pee method. Despite this, I feel like peeing off of a tree stand may cause something out of the ordinary in the woods to mature deer senses. My suggestion: bag the "what did you eat for breakfast" question. Ask the interviewee how they deal with relieving themselves. This is one thing that every human needs to deal with, but something that doesn't get discussed openly at all often, which is surprising with how much effort is put towards scent control these days. Keep up the good work. My only other suggestion would be to pump out more podcasts, but that's just because I'm obsessed with this stuff. Good luck in the woods, boys. Seth Davis. Thanks, Seth, for sending that in. And it raises an interesting question. Do we want to ask our guests every time, how do they pee in the woods?
That is quite an interesting question, but
right. We'll have to ponder that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know if I really want to know how.
I don't know if I really want to know that, but it is an interesting question. And Seth's right. It is something that probably everybody's kind of curious about, but nobody really wants to ask. Which I guess in a sense is our job, but I'm not sure about that one, Seth. But we'll give it some thought. This week's guest is a friend of ours, and he is the CEO of the National Deer Alliance, which is a fairly new organization that was formed to take on some of those other things that the other deer groups don't. And we wanted to learn a little bit more about it. We've heard about it for a little while. I'm a member. I think you're a member, Dusty. And we're trying to learn more about what it is. Because I guess the question was, why do we need more deer hunting organization? It seems like there's an organization for everything that you can imagine, loaded with the banquets and the all the stuff that goes along with the banquets to raise money. And it always seems like the same format over and over. So why do we need one more deer hunting group? Well, we decided to get the man himself, the CEO of the National Deer Alliance, Nick Pinizzotto, to come on and explain that to us, because I'm sure it's on the minds of everybody who might be thinking about joining the National Deer Alliance itself, because they do a good promotion to try to get people to join. And it kind of makes sense when you listen to Nick as to what they do that differently from the other organizations. So looking forward to talking to Nick. But before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the deer news.
The deer news this week is sponsored by the Euro Hanger. You don't have to spend big bucks to hang your big buck. Get yourself a Euro Hanger. Facebook.com/Eurohanger, EUROHANGER.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. In our first story this week, deer decoy sting is sluggish. This article is featured on the Jackson Hole News and Guide website. After about 6 hours of waiting in a soggy Caribou-Targhee National Forest conifer stand, state wildlife officers Monday nabbed one poacher who couldn't resist a roadside 8-point mule deer buck whose head swung from side to side. However, the movements were electronic. The deer, a Wyoming Game and Fish Department decoy, either didn't come into view or was ignored by 9 other motorists who cruised along the Wyoming portion of the Jack Pine Loop on Idaho's deer hunting opening day. But on that day, one trigger-happy Idahoan decided it was worthwhile to send a blast of gunfire from his vehicle into the side of the decoy that stood miles across the state line in a closed Wyoming hunting area. Warden Kyle Lash burst out from his hiding spot and shouted, identifying himself as a law enforcement officer. The hunter, a Rigby, Idaho man, was apparently alarmed, realized he had been duped and fled, Game and Fish's Mark Gocke said. Regional Wildlife Supervisor Brad Hovinga, fortunately, was posted in a chase vehicle and was able to chase down the fleeing poacher after a couple miles. This fall's West Slope Teton deer decoy sting was successful in the sense that illegal gunfire wasn't as abundant as in past years. The forest land east of Teton Valley has chronic problems with poachers who venture across the state line and take their chances. In 2015, the same operation netted 40% violation rate. Of 10 hunters who cruised by, 4 let loose a shot in a closed area they weren't permitted to hunt in. There were similar results in fall of 2013 when the law enforcement tactic resulted in 3 citations and 3 warnings. Blasting a fake deer from a vehicle in a closed hunt area costs the man more than $790 citation for taking a deer without a license and also earned him an additional warning for shooting from a public roadway. The misdeed triggers no mandatory court appearances or loss of hunting privileges. When they caught up with him, he totally confessed to everything, Gaki said. He was embarrassed that he'd been fooled by the decoy. Deer poachers in Webster County caught on camera plead guilty. This article is featured on the Pilot Tribune newspaper website. A 9-month investigation into deer and turkey poaching in Webster County, Iowa, was closed on October 7th when Kyle Alstott, 23 of Fort Dodge, the last of 10 individuals facing charges from Iowa and Nebraska, pled guilty. In November 2015, Iowa State Conservation Officer Matt Bruner came across a website run by Alstott with photos and videos of deer hunts, fishing, and other outdoor activities. Alstott and Roman Thompson, 22, from Omaha, Nebraska, are co-owners of ATM Outdoors, an outdoor hunting filming company based in Fort Dodge. They produce photos, videos, and deer stories for their website, which is where Officer Bruner began his investigation. Bruner recognized Kyle Alstott and Michael Alstott, 44, of Fort Dodge, from photos on the website as individuals that he had charged for hunting over bait in 2011. He began comparing the deer stories on the website to licenses the different individuals featured had purchased in various states. The information didn't line up. Officers served multiple search warrants in late November 2015 and collected phones, computers, and video equipment, deer and turkey mounts, meat, and equipment used to harvest the game animals. What Bruner found was evidence of people shooting deer without the correct licenses, hunting deer over bait, making multiple false claims by non-resident for hunting license and tags, unlawful possession of illegal white-tailed deer, hunting with the aid of artificial light, and more. 5 of the men convicted all face license suspensions in Iowa and 44 other states that are part of the Wildlife Violator Compact. 2 of the men convicted are also facing charges in Nebraska. The Iowa DNR worked in conjunction with the Webster County Attorney's Office, Boone County Attorney's Office, Nebraska Game and Parks, Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism, South Dakota Game, Fish and Parks, Missouri Department of Conservation, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and the U.S. Fish and Game Wildlife Services. Florida using overwhelming force to fight flesh-eating screwworms. This story was originally reported on the CNN.com website and was written by Susan Scuddy. In recent months, Florida has faced both Zika virus and hurricanes. Now the Sunshine State must defend itself against one more natural scourge, the flesh-eating worms of unknown origin. After the U.S. Department of Agriculture confirmed a local infestation of New World screwworm in key deer on September 30th, State Commissioner of Agriculture Adam Putnam declared an agricultural state of emergency in Monroe County, the home of Key West. Despite its name, the adult screwworm is actually a fly, and it typically lays its eggs in an open wound on an animal. Infected animals usually separate from their herd and, if left untreated, die in 7 to 14 days from toxicity or secondary infections. No human or livestock cases have been reported, according to the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The infestation is geographically limited to the Keys, specifically Big Pine Keys and No Name Keys. This is the first local infestation in the nation in more than 3 decades, and the first time in 50 years Florida has seen the screwworm. The New World screwworm can harm humans and their pets, but it is relatively easy to detect and simple to treat in both. The biggest threat is the effect the screwworm can have on livestock. The adult screwworm is about the size of or just slightly larger than the common housefly. The screwworm is different in color and appearance, a technicolor vision with orange eyes, a metallic dark blue to blue-green or gray body, according to the USDA. 3 dark stripes also run down its back. Around 60 key deer have died as a result of the screwworm. This is very concerning since it is estimated that there are only 1,000 key deer left on this planet. Deer crashes through homeowner's roof. This story was featured on the Times-Spokane website and was written by Todd Mason. Hunters might want to relocate to Homewood, Pennsylvania, where it's apparently raining deer. City Council President Alan DeSouza went into his garage Saturday morning and discovered something significant had happened. There was a hole in the roof that, not coincidentally, was about the same size as the deer that had found its way into his garage. I noticed insulation hanging down from the roof, and I wondered, my God, how did it jump that high? DeSouza told the Beaver County Times. Then I saw light shining through the roof, and it hit me. The deer had jumped off the bridge. DeSouza's house is 40 feet under a turnpike overpass. Remarkably, the 6-point buck survived. DeSouza opened the big garage door, and the deer ran off into the woods. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here's Nick Pinizzotto.
Nick Pinizzotto, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're psyched to have you. This has been one of those shows that's been in the background thoughts of us for quite a while, and we're glad that we can finally put this together and talk about, well, deer first and foremost, but talk about the NDA, National Deer Alliance, and all the things that happen in your life around that, basically. We have a lot of questions, and I think a lot of our listeners would like to get some more definition of what this is and what the organization is about and how to join and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that'll be great. And this is the most fun time of year to do something like this with hunting season going on.
Oh, yeah.
So this will be good.
Yeah, it's deer season is the best. So I'd like to learn a little bit about you, Nick, first. Where are you from?
So I grew up in western Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And Pennsylvania is one of the deer hunting hotbed states, if you will. Many deer hunters. Used to be 1 million deer hunters. There aren't quite that many now. But where I grew up, I just assumed that everybody hunted. I didn't realize that, now you move out into the bigger world and you find out that only about 5 to 7% of us actually hunt. But I thought everybody hunted because most people did there.
Right.
And, just growing up there, you were bound to be a deer hunter, and it came to me very naturally.
What was life like growing up in your household? Were you in a rural setting or anywhere close to a suburban area or city? How was your household like? Sure,
it was very rural setting. We're talking about an hour east of Pittsburgh, a little town called Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And our house was very small. It's amazing. I moved out. Me and my brother and sister, we've moved out, and now all of a sudden the house is bigger. But when we were there, the house was very small. We all shared one bathroom. Right. So it's, I was the oldest. So I had a brother and a sister, my mom and dad. And most of the time, because the house was small, we didn't have air conditioning or anything like that. We spent it outside. And my dad, I was very lucky to grow up in a house where my dad was a hunter. My uncle was a hunter. All the neighbors were hunters. And that was my immediate interest. I wanted to be outside and out looking for deer all times of the year. Anything to be out of the house. Like I said, There was not a lot of room to move around, so that became my interest, and never probably really thought that it would grow to the level that it has, ultimately being my profession, but looking back on it now, I guess I probably shouldn't be too surprised.
Gotcha. So it was basically you grew up in a family of hunters, and it was something that you just kind of took for granted, I would imagine, because it was all around you.
Yeah, like I said, I just assumed that everybody had hunted, and It was, frankly, not to date myself completely, but it wasn't uncommon for most of us to have bows in our vehicles, or even guns, frankly.
Sure,
which we probably shouldn't have had after school, because we were gonna be going hunting as soon as we got out of school, and that was the nature of that area, and frankly, I'm happy to say, I guess, that it really, for the most part, still is that way there.
Gotcha. What did the local folk do for employment and things like that? What did your mom and dad do for a living?
Yeah, so it's very blue collar. Like I said, Pittsburgh area, a lot of coal mining for sure.
Okay.
A lot of agriculture, farming. My first job was helping a local farmer bale and stack hay for $3 an hour.
Right.
So that's how most of us grew up there. My dad worked for the state highway department, and was able to retire young from that, which was a good thing. My mom had multiple jobs. What I remember mostly really is that many times my dad would come home from work and my mother would then go to work. So,
gotcha.
Because of that, you end up with a really strong family bond with your brothers and sisters and your neighbors, and really, even to this day, as I watch my parents still live there, and the neighbors, the neighborhood, everyone sort of works together and raises each other's families and kids, and it's an open door environment. And hunting was just topic of conversation pretty much any time.
Gotcha. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
One of each.
One of each.
Yeah, one of each.
And did your sister hunt as well, along with your brother?
She didn't hunt. She had an interest in it. She's gone along with us on hunts, and then never really became a hunter. But she never shied away from it. My brother, definitely a hunter, and still very avid and gets out as much as he can. And is a prison guard in Pennsylvania at a federal prison, so his schedule gets a little bit quirky, but he's been sending me nice trail camera pictures of some good deer over there that he's after, so I know he's excited to get after it. Actually, this weekend is opening day in Pennsylvania.
Oh, gotcha. That's very cool. What's your fondest memory of your childhood?
Yeah, and that's easy, and I'll just stick to the hunting aspect of it. Yeah, I've told this story many times in different talks that I've done, in different functions across the country, and I still vividly remember a couple things. My dad, I guess this is sort of a three-part story. So my dad was an archery hunter, and I kind of make an air quote as I say that. He wasn't real good at it. And in fairness to him, the knowledge wasn't out there. Archery hunting was still an emerging sport. The equipment wasn't good. He had an old recurve. He would hunt from the ground. There weren't the tree stands like you have now. If he did get a shot, he would miss, and most of the stories were, more comedic than anything else. But I would sit there and wait for him to come home, and the minute he'd come home, it would be 20 questions. And even if he didn't see anything, I would tear that story apart and drag it out of him to even hear, well, what was it like walking in there? Did you hear anything? And then I finally reached the age where he would take me out in the woods with him squirrel hunting. So there were a lot of gray squirrels in the air, and we would sit there with the .22 rifle and shoot a few squirrels. And I remember vividly walking out of the woods one evening, and we encountered a scrape. And my dad stopped, and he said, "You know what this is?" And I had no idea, really. And I remember him explaining to me, why that was there and why a buck had made that scrape. And he talked about the rut. And I really think at that moment, I don't know, maybe I was even 8 years old, maybe 10. I just was blown away by this, mesmerized by deer and how they work and what they do. And I just had this thirst for knowledge and wanted to know why they do what they do. And just really that moment for me is, I would say, probably one of my fondest specific memories. And another one would be my uncle, who passed away far too young. He lived in the Philadelphia area. He would always come the day after Thanksgiving. And in Pennsylvania, the firearm season always opens the Monday after Thanksgiving, and spend those days with us, and then go out hunting opening day. I only got to hunt with him for 2 years before he passed away. And I just very fond memories of him showing up, and that meant that it was truly hunting season. And he was an awful hunter. I think he shot his first buck when he was 41, 42 years old. But those are the memories that still stick with me today, and are important to me still, and have really led to me finding a profession with deer. Gotcha.
That's awesome. It sounds like you had a great formation there, like a good foundation in hunting, and has kind of paved the way for where you are today. Did you go anywhere in between where you are today, like before you have your job as the CEO of the NDA? Were there other jobs along the way that influenced how you got here?
Oh, sure. Yes. I opted to go for my undergraduate degree at a local university, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Good school, but I'd be honest, when I went there, I didn't really know what the heck I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something with the environment. I like to fish as well, so something with, water conservation or something along those lines. So I took a pretty general degree in environmental geography, and I figured really the most important thing was I needed to have that piece of paper that said I graduated from college, because I was not a fan of formal education. I was a terrible underachiever, as my mother always likes to bring up when it came to high school and college, at least undergraduate college. And I figured that I could craft where I wanted to go in my career once I had that degree, and get out there and work my way into some things. So what I did was, actually, it's kind of funny. My very first real job out of college, I was reviewing subdivisions in a rural county in Pennsylvania, in Armstrong County, Pennsylvania, not too far from where I grew up. So I was still more or less at home, but I stayed there. The minute I got that job, I started sending resumes everywhere else, because I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And it only took me 10 months to get a job with the county conservation district. And I did a lot of farm planning, soil fertility management work, and then eventually some stream and habitat work. So now I was able to, over a couple of years there, start to gain that experience. Then I worked for a private consultant as an environmentalist for another couple of years, again doing stream and river conservation, some habitat work. And then I landed a job with an organization called the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. And that's where I got my real opportunity, because they were looking for somebody to start a brand new program in water conservation. And more or less, they said, hey, you're our one person. Here's the money you have to start with. And here's your chance to run with this thing, make it grow, see what happens. And, there was obviously some luck along the way, and you learn some people or meet people that help you learn, and become mentors. And eventually I was able to build that program over an 11-year period to, I think when I left, I had 20 employees, a couple $1 million budget. And because I had the ability to really take the program in a direction I wanted, I started to deviate a little bit from just the stream work and started to do upland work and habitat work and working with things that end up helping deer at the end of the day, And while that was going on, I also got into outdoor writing and started submitting articles to different publications, and they started to catch on a little bit. And then also started a deer scent company. So began selling, cover scents and urine attractants, and did that for a few years. So again, really getting into that outdoor industry, but not what I would call officially. It was always kind of on the fringe and doing my own kind of freelance thing. And from there, and as I'm saying this, man, I've had a lot of jobs. I went to North Dakota. This was a bit of a leap of faith, and I'll thank my wife for that, because she was up for an adventure. We didn't have any kids at the time, and went to be the CEO of Delta Waterfowl Foundation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And which is a really cool organization based out of Bismarck, North Dakota, and also in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And that was what I would say my first real outdoors industry job. And did that for a little while, and then went over to the Sportsmen Alliance, which is a great organization based in Columbus, Ohio, where I still live, that focuses on anti-hunting issues and, protecting our sports, protecting hunting, fishing, and trapping. And it's the only organization that's their sole mission to do that. And was the CEO there for a few years. And eventually I found myself, when the whole Cecil the Lion debacle broke, which I'm sure we all remember, I ended up being the person on CBS News This Morning, representing the hunting industry and trying to explain that all big game hunting isn't bad, and got some, a lot of feedback and some, I guess, recognition out of that. And, the biggest thing is that I always, even when I was at Delta Waterfowl, everybody always said, well, you're a deer guy. Even though you're working on ducks, you're a deer guy. And that had always stuck with me, being a deer person, because that was my focus. That's all I talked about. And then this whole idea of the National Deer Alliance came about. So when the National Deer Alliance, the idea of it was first announced, I remember I was at the Sportsmen's Alliance, had been invited to what they were calling the North American Deer Summit. And the reason that had started was because the Quality Deer Management Association had been doing some internal planning and even contemplated changing their direction a little bit, because they were really bothered by this idea that there are 12 million deer hunters in this country, but they were only getting 50 or 60,000 of them to become members of QDMA. Right. So they're kicking around things like, do we change our name? Do we try to change our focus? And luckily, and I'm a life member of QDMA, they thought that through and said, we serve a really good niche here, and I think we need to continue being good at that, but let's throw it out to a larger audience of people and see if maybe what we really need here is a completely different organization. It's sort of the every deer hunter's organization that can focus on all species and focus on policy, which will allow us to stick more to our conservation mission. So as they announced the idea of the Deer Alliance at the second Deer Summit, they had two of them. I remember vividly sitting out in the crowd being a little bit skeptical of the idea. They weren't sure exactly where it was going to go at that time. They didn't have a board of directors yet. It was still just an idea. I'm sitting there thinking, well, I think the last thing we need is another organization that's going to do banquets and try to compete with the other groups to raise money and work for deer. And so I to be honest, initially wasn't really for the idea. But then as time progressed and they seated a board of directors and they started to put together where the organization really needed to go, that's when I became a little more interested in it. So this all happened around, early 2015 is whenever the new board of directors got together, had, a very important meeting where they started getting into what is this organization going to be. Right. And they put together a really impressive, and I'm really excited about our board of directors, because it's a group of fellow CEOs in the industry, but it's not just that. It's people that we have biologists or whitetail and mule deer experts on the board. We've got former professors on the board. It's an impressive group of people that have really been proven in the industry and in the deer world. And that was important to me because now I'm starting to see some structure here, and I can see where this thing would be helpful. But again, not seeing myself as the person running the thing. I was happy at Sportsmen Alliance.
Right.
And when I was first had conversations about the job, my initial goal, it's kind of funny, I wrote letters of recommendation for 2 other candidates for the job who I thought might be
funny.
Who I thought might be good for it. And then it was an awkward call when I had to call them later and say, hey, I think I might take this job. But luckily they were friends and they understood. But this continued to progress and get more formalized. They announced that, hey, we're not going to be an organization that competes for memberships, and we're not going to be another banquet group. And instead, we're going to fill this very unique niche. And by the way, the Mule Deer Foundation, Whitetails Unlimited, and QDMA, not only are we not competing, they're on the board and they're contributing a significant amount of money to make this happen. So now all of a sudden this is a completely different thing, and I'm all for it. I'm trying to help them find candidates. And it's funny because Andrew McKean, who's the editor of Outdoor Life, he and I are sitting next to each other in a meeting, and as they're talking about this, he leans over to me and says, hey, what do you think about this? This is something good for you. And I said, no, it won't be me, but hopefully I can help them get someone. Well, lo and behold, I eventually became part of the process, and was offered the job and took it. As my wife and I had talked through it and discussed it, I just thought to myself, why are you even not considering this job? Because even though it's a little iffy yet, and we don't exactly know where the money's coming from, and we don't know the stability of it, you have a chance to start a brand new national deer organization that can really change the landscape for how we hunt and manage deer and how we all work together towards some common goals for all deer all across the country.
Gotcha.
And when you really think about that, I mean, that's a hell of an opportunity. Why would you ever pass that up? And I'm not the type of person to be too nervous or scared about, being able to get something done. And I just said, you know what, this is, it's calling to me. It's something I think that I need to do, and it's something I know that I can do. And here I am, almost a year later now, moving the thing forward.
Kidding.
That's kind of the story of my career and how I ended up where I did today. And it's kind of a long story, but it's been a great journey, and I like where I'm at right now.
It's an interesting past, and it's colorful. Like, you've been a lot of different, or at the head of a lot of different organizations, all with similar types of missions, I would say. And
yeah. Thank you. It's I get asked all the time. People ask me, how do you get into the outdoors industry, or I want to do what you do. How do you do that? And it's always difficult for me to answer because there is no set path.
Right.
I think what you do, you don't. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
If you look at your path, I mean, it's not really a path. It's just it's not a straight line. Let's put it that way. Then it's not predictable, and you've went through a bunch of different growing phases personally to get where you are now.
Yeah, that's right. And I just tell people, really, it's just about staying connected, working hard, believing that it can happen is a big part of it. And you'll find yourself there. And I go out of my way, and to any listeners that are hearing this and are interested in answers to that question, feel free to contact me, because I don't remember a lot of people lined up to help me along the way, but because of that, I go out of my way to do everything I can to try to help people. So I've always been very, very willing and open to that.
Very cool. All right, let's get a little deeper into the NDA as to what this whole organization is really about. And I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here with you, because I think this may be what some people are thinking. So I want to get the answer to this burning question. There are other deer hunting organizations, or deer organizations, I should say. Whitetails Unlimited, Mule Deer Foundation, QDMA. And you touched on the QDMA just a little bit about where their struggles might have been. Why do we need a fourth group, or why do we need an additional to represent our interest?
I love that question.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I love that question because it's the same question I was asking when I was first becoming familiar with it. So each of those organizations have very distinct missions.
Okay.
Most of them, especially QDMA and Mule Deer Foundation, their missions are really conservation driven. They do a lot of on the ground conservation type work. QDMA has even more specific than that, a lot of, private property management and habitat management and selective harvest, this type of thing. And Mule Deer Foundation obviously is fully focused on just mule deer, and they do everything from funding habitat projects to trap and transfer programs. And Whitetails Unlimited is I would describe them more as an enthusiasm organization. They keep the passion burning just for deer hunting, and they do raise money for local projects and have some of their banquets are among the most fun ones you can go to. It's just a great group of guys that care about deer hunting, but none of them are policy focused. And the reality is, as we watch the landscape of deer management, as we watch what has unfolded over the last, really over the last 50 years, but really more so over the last 20 years, it has really gone to more of a focus on from biological science to political science. So no longer are we in an environment where we can simply say the science tells us we need to do X, Y, and Z in terms of deer management. Mm-hmm. That doesn't win the day anymore because we've got a political pressure somewhere or a local pressure or an anti-hunting pressure that says we see your science, but we don't like it. We're uncomfortable with it. Or we know the science says this, but we don't see enough deer in our neck of the woods. So that's a problem. Or it has become every bit, if not more, as much about managing people as it is about managing deer.
Yeah.
And as much as QDMA and Mule Deer Foundation and Whitetails Unlimited would love to try to cover all those bases as well as their conservation work, there is just way too much out there to be done. And that is the niche that the NDA fills. And so what we do is, number one, our membership is free. And someone will say, well, how in the world can you operate on a free membership? Well, first of all, we don't want to be in competition with the other deer groups. So we tell people, if you're going to do the paid membership, please support them because you're going to a conservation on-the-ground mission. It's important.
Right.
Give them your dollars knowing that they're going to give us some money to support what we're doing. But the most important thing we need is your contact information and the ability to send you action alerts so that you can send a letter to your legislator to let them know how you feel about a particular issue that impacts deer or hunting, either nationally or in your state or even in your local community. Because I can tell you at any given moment, there's 100+ bills out there at the state and federal level that are impacting deer and hunters in one way or another. Most hunters don't know about them. That's why we need to build this huge base of people so that we can let the hunters know about them and make it easy for them to contact legislators and become part of that political process. And in terms of the money and how we operate, because I get that question a lot, we're largely funded by industry. So manufacturers, the deer groups, everything from a small deer scent company up to large companies like Vista Outdoor, which owns Primos and Savage Arms and Federal Ammunition. They support us. Yep. National Shooting Sports Foundation, Archery Trade Association. And as long as I'm running this organization, and I've really been making it a point to get this out there, I don't see any need for us to grow and become some giant group that we have to spend all of our time fundraising to stay alive. I would much rather us be, quite frankly, a 4 or 5 person shop that have people that are good on policy and good on hunting, who can be effective and be flexible and we don't need a $10 million a year budget to do that. But man, we could do a heck of a lot on a $1 or $2 million budget. So I'm a big fan of responsible growth and not growing just for the sake of growth. I want to be nimble. I don't want to ever stress the industry and cause them to have to give us a bunch of money to do this thing. And I think we can be really effective for a pretty reasonable price tag.
Gotcha. All right. So if I were to sum this up, could I say that this is essentially the NRA equivalent, but for deer hunters?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay. Other than the NRA is a monstrous organization.
Yes. The size aside, the purpose,
sure,
the mission is similar.
Exactly. We want to be on the front.
Right. NRA,
we want to be on the policy front lines on behalf of deer hunters.
Okay. NRA's on the front lines for policies when it comes to gun ownership. NDA's on the front lines when it comes to hunting and all things that might affect your policies or legislation or bills that are coming down from state or federal levels.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. All right. That makes sense to me. So how's it going so far? I mean, this is a fairly new organization. You're at the helm. What's your assessment of the group so far?
You know, I get really excited about what we're doing. When I'll admit again, when I first took the job and was getting the shop set up, so to speak, I started to wonder, well, I wonder what I'm going to do to keep busy here initially. And it didn't take long to realize that there is a ton of things to do. And frankly, I really need those 4 or 5 other people right now to help keep up with it all. It's going well. We reached a couple really important milestones in this first year. So the first thing we needed to do was put together a good strategic plan that really outlined the things that we were going to focus on, at least for the first 3 years of the organization. We didn't have that before, so it was very hard to describe what we were about and what we were going to do. So we got that in place. That was important. Our website was launched earlier this year, which is a really great resource, and it's a place, you know, we purposely didn't try to market and get people to join because we didn't have a place to send them. You know, it's almost like you don't want to invite someone to your house if you don't have it in order. And we didn't have the house in order yet, so we couldn't really invite people and have them have a negative first impression. That was a struggle for me because I wanted to get the thing growing, but I knew that we had to be patient. So we put the new website in place, and it's, again, really, it's been an awesome resource. And once we did that, we started to put the call out really to steamroll this idea of gaining members and starting to be on more hunters' radar screens. I think we still, because we are so new, we have a lot of people that are uncertain about us and or maybe don't even know about us. But I can tell you in terms of growth, we'll just use social media, for example. When I started, we had about 6,000 people who liked our Facebook page. And that grew maybe to about 8,000. And then we launched the website, and now we're very close to punching 20,000, and that's only been a few weeks. So really, it's not that people don't love the idea. It's just they don't know about us. And then when they know about us and learn what we're doing, it becomes very easy to hit that like button or to sign up for the free membership. So I'm excited. I get frustrated sometimes because I want to be further ahead, but I describe it as it's almost like taking a walk on the beach. You're walking along, you don't feel like you went anywhere, but then when you really turn back and look, you know, the beach house is 2 miles away. So I think we've made some progress. We've got a heck of a long way to go. You know, I always tell my board, I'm glad you're excited about this, but we haven't arrived. We still have a long way to go.
Right. How old is the NDA now?
Officially incorporated in May of 2015.
So this thing's like just a baby. It's just brand new.
I was hired December 1st, so that's kind of what we describe as the beginning of the organization, really.
I think that's a pretty good start. You know, it sounds like you got somebody a good leader. It sounds like you have a good board. Sounds like you have the right mission, and it sounds like you did pretty good for your first year overall.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's always hard to see sometimes when you're in the middle of it. But I think so, and I take an honest assessment of it, and I appreciate you saying that. So yeah, I mean, we've come a long way, but like I said, we've got so much further to go. And, and that's my focus is.
Yeah, there's so much more to do. But as far as the first startup year, sounds like it's been fairly successful. That's interesting. We'll have to get into how to join the group towards the end of the show. But I'd like to kind of turn our focus a little bit more now on hunting and deer hunting, and bring Dusty back into the mix here because I want to know what you keep in your backpack when you go hunting.
Do you carry a backpack in the woods with you?
I do carry a backpack. Yes.
Any particular brand or style?
Yeah. So I've used a few different over the years. So, a lot of it depends on the type of hunting I'm doing. So
let's just base it off whitetail.
Okay. Doing whitetail hunting for sure. I carry 2 different packs, actually. I'll carry if I'm filming my hunt, I'll carry a third pack, which is a Sitka pack. It's called the Sitka Toolbox. And it's just sort of a bigger open pack where I can get my camera arm in there and my camera in the extra gear. But when I'm not doing that and I'm just going out for a hunt, I've got a couple favorites. I've got one by Alps Outdoors, which I really like. If I've got a longer walk into my stand, I can strap my bow to the back of that thing, and it's got plenty of compartments for all the unnecessary junk that I think I need out there on stand. And I'm a very forgetful person, so I like a pack that I can throw all my stuff into and have it in one place and not lose it. So that's a good pack. From Alps has a great line of packs, very affordable. And I know the owner, the company, good people, good company. And then the other pack that I've been carrying so far this year is a smaller pack made by Tenzing, another really good backpack company. Again, good people. Early season, you just don't need a whole lot. You're not carrying calls and those types of things, and you're pretty much in warm weather gear. So it's a little bit smaller. I can throw the few things I need in there, and it works well for me. So those are the 3 different packs that I'll carry depending on the situation.
Gotcha. Let's say we're getting close to rut and you're starting to pack some calls. Tell us what kind of calls you got in that pack.
Yeah, so I do like to have calls with me. I'm not a huge fan of calling. I'm reluctant. I'm a reluctant user of calls, but I carry 3 different grunt calls, and I cannot tell you. I know one of them is a buck roar. I think that I'm not going to say the company name. It might have been Hunter Specialties that come out with that several years ago, but that was a winner for me back whenever I first bought it because it seemed like there was a buck every time you blew the thing. So I still carry that call. And then I've got 2 others that what I try to do, quite honestly, because I'm not a big believer that pitch makes all that difference. I think it's more or less timing, and you have to have a deer that's ready. I try to find the most nondescript, off-the-wall kind of call that most people probably aren't carrying, just so that I can have something a little different than what someone else might have out there, because this isn't scientific at all, but I believe that I have seen deer become much more call wary in recent years, and I think it's because every time somebody sees a buck, they're on that call blowing on it, and they have associated a lot of those calls with human beings. So I try to go for something that's a little bit a lesser known quantity. Probably has some dust on it laying in the bottom of a shelf somewhere. And like I said, I like to carry 2 or 3 just to keep it mixed up. I'm a golfer too. I like to have a couple different putters for when one doesn't work. It's more of a psychological thing. I grab the other one.
It makes sense though.
Yeah.
What get into a little bit about your bow. What kind of bow are you shooting?
So I'm shooting a Prime Ion. It's the best bow that I've ever shot, and I don't mean any disrespect to other bow companies that I've shot. I've shot Hoyt, I've shot Bear. I've even shot a Cabela's bow, which is actually a Bowtech, Diamond Bowtech series. I shot a bow for them for 1 year to give them some feedback. It was a great bow, but there's just something about the back wall on this bow when I first drew it at the archery trade show a couple years ago that is, you feel like you can draw it and just walk away from it and it'll stay drawn. It just fits me well. It's probably a little bit heavier than some of the bows that you can get your hands on nowadays, but it's durable. I'll drag it through the Badlands on a mule deer hunt and bang it up 100 trees during an archery season, and it keeps rolling, and it's a very smooth drawing bow. It's quiet, and I have 100% confidence in it, so it's a great bow.
What kind of arrows you shooting?
For several years, I've been shooting the Easton Axis. That is, for those who may not be familiar with them, it's a thinner diameter arrow, but it's a little bit heavier grains per inch. I think the ones I shoot are 11.3 maybe grains per inch. So if you're an ultimate speed guy, the most important thing for you is 350 feet per second and 1 pin to 40 yards. It's probably not the arrow for you. But these arrows are penetrating machines, and I have just had tremendous success with them since I started using them several years ago, and I've never switched. I've never had the need to switch.
Any particular broadhead you're tipping your arrows with?
Yeah, I shoot the Rage Hypodermic. I used to shoot the original Rage 2-blade, and to be honest, when I started using them several years ago, I made that switch and never went back from the Rage. Now, when I shoot a fixed blade, when I was on a bear hunt this spring in Idaho, and you can't use mechanicals there, I'll use either a G5 Montec or an old traditional Muzzy 3-blade, which I have always found to perform really, really well. So those are my broadhead choices.
Gotcha. How many pound draw are you pulling?
71.
71 pounds. Let's get into your
71
camouflage.
pounds.
Let's say we're
What's
going
that?
on, let's get into camouflage a little bit. Let's say we're going on early fall, 50-degree temps. What kind of camo are you putting on?
So I'm a 100% committed Sitka guy. Have been for a long time. Again, to me, it's important to have. I have a relationship with these companies and know them. They're good people, and that means something to me. So I think the people behind Sitka are good people, and they give back to the industry in a big way. But I love their camouflage, and I love the layering system. And the first time I ever wore it was on a Badlands hunt in North Dakota for mule deer. And I remember just the difference in how you feel at the end of the day wearing that, as opposed to, maybe something else that isn't made quite the same way. So a 50-degree day, I'm out there probably in my Sitka elevated 2 pattern. And I'm probably wearing the the fleece pants and probably the hoodie with the fleece vest. I would say that for a 50-degree day. And I'm going to be comfortable all day, and I'm going to be plenty warm. And because of that layering system, I can add on or take off if I need to.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. Hang on, ladder, climber, or a ground blind? What's your preference?
Yeah, so that's a good question because I've seen this evolve. I went from my younger days and, the screw-in steps into the trees and all that nonsense. And, not that it's nonsense, it's just a lot of work. But as I've gotten older and, my income level has changed over the years, you get a little more progressed in your career, you can buy nicer things. So I use mostly lock-on stands or hang-on stands with ladders now because it's easier to climb. I'm only in my early 40s, but it's harder to climb than it was when I was in my 20s and 30s. So I go for comfort. So I'll use a ladder stand, no particular brand. If it's an area that's too far really to be carrying a ladder to get a ladder, and I still will go to like like a Summit buck step, which works pretty well because you can stack those and carry them a little easier than a ladder. And rarely, but I'll still use a screw-in step now and then if I need to. Tree stands, I've got several of the XOP models, which are very, very similar to Lone Wolf. Matter of fact, I believe the fellow that started that company was originally with Lone Wolf. And I also have one Lone Wolf. Those are my best stands. And I've also got a Muddy stand, which I like a lot. So I don't really necessarily have brand loyalty. I'm looking for good quality and, always looking for a bargain if I can find it. But, a good stand on a long sit is pretty important.
Gotcha. It sounds like you had quite the arson stand-wise there.
Yeah. I probably overdo it in terms of stand locations, but, like right now I'm sitting here in central Ohio and we've had an east wind for the past 3 days because of this goofy system coming through. Well, I've got a great stand for an east wind. So it's nice to have it out there. So I might set a stand and sit in it one time all season, but it's just nice to have that option.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense. Any particular boots that you're wearing to the woods?
I mix it up. I've never been a person that just believes you have to have the knee-high rubber boot or you're in big trouble. I think that no matter what we wear and no matter how we wash ourselves, no matter what product we're using, the deer are going to smell us if we're not hunting the wind properly. So I'll wear a comfortable pair of boots that are waterproof. So I really like Danner pronghorns for early season. They're Gore-Tex, so they're waterproof and they're comfortable. They're leather. Hopefully nobody hearing this freaks out and says this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And then when it's wetter out or colder, I'll go to a Lacrosse knee-high rubber boot, which not because it's a knee-high rubber, but because they're comfortable. My feet are going to stay dry and they're also pretty warm. It's a durable boot. And I've always found those to be dependable and work really well.
Perfect. Jay, let's go on a hunt.
Yeah, let's get into a hunt. Nick, what's your favorite style hunting, by the way?
Man, people ask me if you could only do one hunt, what would it be? And it's hard to pass up a Midwest whitetail hunt in November.
Gotcha. I
love the incredible challenge. I love that too, but I grew up in the East and I'll always have that love for, chasing Eastern or Midwest whitetails. So that's if I could only do one more hunt, that's what I would choose. Stand hunting, you'd asked me earlier whether I prefer a blind or stand hunting. I prefer a stand. I've hunted from blinds and it's nice to have them, especially, if you have inclement weather. And firearms hunting, I'll use a blind more often, but my favorite thing is to get up in a tree and get situated, get comfortable, and just let the day unfold where I can see all around me and hear. And just talking about it is getting me excited about being out there. So that's my preference.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So let's explore a deer hunt with you, Nick. You said that you enjoy the Midwest hunts, and I'd like to see if you have a memorable deer hunt that you could take us on, kind of go play by play, and set the stage. How did it come about? And let's listen to kind of how it unfolded through the kill shot. Could you take us on a deer hunt with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I had the opportunity to talk a little bit last week, and I've been thinking about that question. And as much as I want to go back to a hunt that maybe happened years ago, I'm only going to go back to last year.
Wow. Okay.
And
where are we going?
Yeah. We're actually going to stay here in Ohio.
Okay.
And I'll preface this by saying I've been very fortunate. I've killed a lot of really nice deer in my hunting career, but I always tell people I don't consider myself to be a great hunter. Actually, I'm a terrible hunter, but I have a very strong will and a very strong work ethic when it comes to hunting deer, and I don't give up easily. And that's the only reason I killed this particular deer that I'm going to take you through right now.
Cool.
So I started out the Ohio season last year focused on one particular buck that I called Second Chance, and the reason I called him that is because he was a deer that I passed when he was a 3-year-old. I watched him grow up as a 4-year-old, and now as a 5-year-old. I picked up his sheds when he was a 4-year-old. He was 161 inches then. And he's really anything that approaches Boone and Crockett to me is a world-class deer. And that was the deer of my focus at the beginning of the year. This is a 5-year-old deer. He's in the pretty much peak maturity. He's probably at least 170 inches at this point, a 12-point deer. And I had an encounter with him the very first week of the season, not where I would think I would get a shot, but I caught him moving through, the thick underbrush that's still out there. Mm-hmm. In September, and then I saw him again. I had a close encounter with him in early November as he was with a doe, but he was laying under my stand as I was walking in. He had a doe with him at midday under my stand, and he didn't run off immediately, so I got a good look at him, and he got a good look at me. But that deer disappeared on me. And about the time, just a few weeks before that, I started getting pictures of another deer that I'd recognized from the previous year that I named Curfew. And some people get into or don't get into naming deer. For me, it's just more about keeping track of them, and you sort of develop these relationships.
Yeah.
But I called him Curfew because he apparently was living somewhere else in the summer and early part of the season, because I'd never get a picture of him. And he would show up in late to mid-October, or even in the winter. It would be the first time I'd see him. So I would always describe him as being late to the party.
It's a great name, by the way.
Yeah.
It's a great name.
Thank
for
you.
A deer.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, Curfew he's a straight 8-point, very clean, but massive, and just real long, twisty, brow tines, and just this gnarly bruiser of a buck. And I was getting pretty good pictures of him, but it was always at dark, always at night. Finally had an encounter with him in shooting light. I'm going to say the second week in November. Okay. I'm in my stand. It's a stand that I'll only hunt if the weather is absolutely terrible. So we're talking wind and rain, because I'm getting close to a bedding area, and you have to be able to slip in there undetected, because that deer might be laying, 50 yards from your stand. So I meticulously worked my way up into this stand, and sure enough, about an hour before dark, I see him stand up out of his bed about 50 yards away.
Right.
And he started to come toward me, and as these big bucks tend to do, he just sensed something wasn't right, and all I could do was watch him walk away. So, but finally, I had a daytime visual on this deer, and I said, this deer is now moving at daylight. This is a deer that I can kill. But then nothing. Didn't see him again until almost the end of November. My dad and I it killed me, but we left in the second or third week in November and went over to South Dakota. We both shot nice mule deer over there. And I couldn't wait to get back to Ohio to get back on this deer. And I had another encounter with him coming out of the woods. He had a doe cornered in just a little thicket with some goldenrod.
Yeah. And
in broad daylight, standing there as proud as a peacock. And he was watching me the whole time. And he knew that I couldn't get to him without him running off. And just all I could do was stand there and watch him with my binoculars and tend that doe. And then he walked out of my life again. Disappeared for a while, but I kept hunting him. I hunted him. The firearms season came, and I'm primarily a bow hunter, but I'm certainly not opposed to killing a deer with a gun either, especially a real good deer.
Sure.
So I go out for the opening day of firearms season and didn't see him or the kind of deer that I was really after. And I go to check my camera. It's near one of my stands, and here he walked right by one of my stands that I didn't decide to sit in a half hour after daylight,
right.
Of opening day of firearms season with another pretty good buck, and I could have shot him easily, but I couldn't see him from where I was. And then firearms season came and went. Then we're back into a late archery season. Didn't see him in person, but I'm getting pictures of him. And then we had a late muzzleloader season, and this deer all of a sudden became visible again. Right after the rut, he went nocturnal for a while.
Yep.
But he was staying on the property. And I thought, he hasn't left, so I still have a chance at this deer. And now this is the time of year where most people they're hanging it up for the year. Their stuff's already packed away. We're into early January. It's after New Year's Day. And here I am. I'm still out there slugging it away, trying to get on this deer. And I saw this deer. It's a 2 or 3 day muzzleloader season, but I saw him each day, but always just out of range. He would enter the field. He'd be the last buck to enter the field, and it'd always be right toward the end of shooting light. And they were feeding on some waste soybeans that were still left out in the field.
Yeah.
But even not being able to get a shot at him, at least what I thought was a good ethical shot, I started to gain some confidence because now I was able to use that time to scout him a little bit from afar. And I had his home range honed down to about, I'm saying no more than maybe 30 or 40 acres. So now the muzzleloader season's gone, and now I'm back to archery season. Well, then we had some horrendous weather, weather you don't even want to be hunting in.
Right.
But at least cleared up enough to where I could get out and get some more pictures, and I had pictures of them again. And it actually spotted them while I was on a conference call sitting in my truck.
Gotcha.
Walking across the hillside. So at this point, it's January 14th. So again, a lot of states are closed, and it's a cold, miserable day. And I come home and I told my wife, I said, I have to do this, but I'm going to be the only person in Ohio setting tree stands tomorrow. But I'm going to set 2 stands, one for one wind and one for the other one, because when I get out to that farm, I never know exactly which way it's going to be blowing, and whatever the wind is good for, that's where I'm going. So I set 2 stands, and my hands are freezing trying to get these things set on January 14th, and it's snowing, and it's just kind of a messy day. And then January 15th, the next morning, I'll admit it, I was a little bit lazy that morning as I'm walking up the hillside and daylight's already coming on, and I'm cursing myself, saying, if you're going to do this, do it right. Now's not the time to start taking shortcuts.
Right.
And my hope was the temperature raised overnight. And my hope was that the snow would be soft and quiet. Well, unfortunately, it didn't drop. It didn't raise far enough, and I'm walking through this crunchy snow, and I hear deer snorting and running, and so I'm miserable. I'm thinking I'm never going to see this deer, and I do eventually get in my stand. And once the woods calm down, I'm noticing a lot of deer feeding and seeing quite a few deer. I saw a couple of young bucks sparring, so if nothing else, I had a good show. And finally, about mid-morning, I'm going to say at this point, it's probably about 9 a.m., I spot a deer off in the distance, just sort of feeding by itself, and pull up my binoculars, and sure enough, it's curfew. And where he was, he could have went any direction, but for whatever reason, he started working his way up into the area where I thought he mostly wanted to hang out, and feeding his way. And the one thing I was concerned about was he had this young doe with him that he'd been just hanging out with for the past few weeks. And everywhere she went, he went. And when they come up closer to where I was, she broke off to the left, and I thought for sure he would follow her, but he didn't for some reason, and he just continued straight. And thinking to myself, I can't, this is actually going to happen. I mean, he's actually going to come into range, this deer.
Right.
And he comes working up to a shooting lane I have off to my right, and I turn, and I've got my bow. And you're putting the release on the string. So this is a moment that all bow hunters know well. You actually have that feeling, and you realize this is about to happen.
Oh yeah.
And so I draw my bow. I always drop my pin from top to bottom, and I just remember this vividly. And as soon as I touched the release, I knew I wasn't ready. I knew it was way too early. And I watched the arrow sail right over his back. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I had not had a clean miss like that on a deer, at least since I could remember. It had been a long time. So I was shocked. And the deer takes 2 or 3 jumps, and he's looking around, and he has no idea where it came from or even what it was. So I'm just watching him and almost crying in my stand. And I can just feel my legs shaking because you've got that adrenaline going. It's cold.
Sure.
There's this deer standing there, and he, for whatever reason, he calmed down and decided to start feeding back in behind me.
No way.
And once again, he starts working right toward me. I said, I can't believe this deer is going to come give me a second shot. And at that point, I realized I don't have another arrow nocked. I was too busy having a pity party for myself.
Right.
That I forgot to knock another arrow. So at this point, I'm trying to quietly knock an arrow in this dead silent morning. Was able to get it knocked, and he's working his way through some pretty thick areas. And eventually he stopped, and he was just sniffing the ground and maybe feeding. And I thought he needs to take one more step, and I've got this little window between some grapevines, a far harder shot than I had the first time, by the way. Mm-hmm. And he stepped into that opening, and I didn't have to stop him. He stopped himself, and I hit the rangefinder. It was 35 yards.
Nice.
And just at this point, I was kind of angry and I guess more fired up.
Yep. And
as soon as I released the arrow, I knew it was good, and it hit him right through the chest, and he spun around. And there's snow on the ground, so as he's taking off and barreling down over the hillside, I could see the blood trail visibly from where I was sitting in my stand.
You saw red.
I knew it was
Nice.
a good hit. I saw lots of red.
That's a good
And
feeling.
I gathered myself and shaky legged it down the stand, and I still gave him a good hour or so. And I called a buddy, which I always recommend that you do, even if you're sure. Call someone to help you get calmed down and help you with that blood trail, because it's just nice to have that other perspective. And I had a friend come out and we start tracking it, and he didn't go 100 yards, and they came up on him, and finally had my hands on a deer that, again, if it wasn't for just the sheer will and not being willing to give up, even though it was January 15th and having all those encounters, it's hard to have a more memorable hunt than finally taking down curfew.
That's a great story. If you could see my face, and this isn't a video call, but you would say, I'm shaking my head now. That's a good story.
Me too.
Yeah, because we hear so many on this show, so you know when it's a good one and when it's not. And I'm giving you the thumbs up. Yeah, that's a good story.
I like the fact that he missed the first shot and was able to knock another arrow and finish it off. I was right there with you.
Yeah, it's like sometimes that doesn't. You got your composure, and although you're a little miffed, but now you honed it in. And some guys would just say, "Forget it, I'm done. I'm not even going to try." But you stuck it out, and that made the difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, I don't know that I've got a lot of talent, but I've got a lot of will, to
you willed that
to succeed.
Deer. Yes,
and I don't like losing. And to me, I felt like I was losing if I just gave up on him.
Right.
So it was an emotional time. I mean, just seeing him on the ground, I just kind of dropped to my knees and stared at him for a couple minutes before walking over to him, because you just respect these animals so much, and the pursuit and the challenge to get close to them. And I fell in love with this deer, and I even told my wife I was sad for a while because I knew I wasn't going to see him out there again. I look on him on my wall every day now, but it's still not the same. It's just such a deep respect and a love for these animals, and I love chasing them. And it doesn't have to be shooting them. It's just we're lucky to be able to do it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you develop these relationships with these deer, and although the pursuit and the means and the end is to take this deer, there is that moment, like a moment of almost sorrow. You're like, I'm sorry that this is over, but I think it truly is out of such a respect for the animal when it's all said and done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Nick, I had a couple questions about the NDA before we turn to our 10 rapid-fire questions. You had mentioned that the NDA was on the forefront of any kind of policies and alerting the members of the NDA to any issues that might require a vote or some kind of gathering of names on lists to show the legislators that we're serious about this and we want you to vote a certain way. Are there any issues that are out there right now that have come across your desk that we should be aware of?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple that come to mind. One actually that I thought of as you were saying that is just the whole potential for the transfer of federal lands to the states. It's people think that's just a Western issue, but it's not just a Western issue. There are many lands in the East, public lands that are currently open to hunting that the federal government may transfer, or at least some legislators are pushing for the transfer of those lands into state hands. That's a scary thing because we could potentially lose those lands to hunting if that were to happen, and we're talking millions and millions of acres. So pay attention to that one. There's lots of information out there if you Google it, or even if you go to our website, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. We have information in our action alert system that talks about that bill. And then, other issues that impact deer directly. So we've been doing quite a bit of work on chronic wasting disease. It's a disease that is always fatal to deer. It's in, the majority. It's in a lot of states. Let's put it that way. And we're really trying to make sure that it's a disease that we can control the best that we can. I don't think it's one that we can get rid of, but it can be a bad thing for your local deer herds. And we're trying to educate people and get good information out there about that, and working with states, at the state level where these things are managed, to put in good regulations and good plans in place to try to control this disease. So chronic wasting disease is another biggie that really impacts all deer hunters.
Gotcha. And if we hear this as listeners and we aren't members of the NDA, what do we do? How do we sign up, and what types of alerts are you putting out if there's something we need to pay attention to?
So one of the really cool things about us is that NDA membership is free. Won't cost you a thing. You just go to our website at nationaldeeralliance.com, and very much in the front page, it'll hit you right in the face. It'll say join now. So you just give us your email address and your zip code. And the reason that your address and zip code are important, it's not because we're going to send you a bunch of stuff in the mail. We don't do that. It's so that when an issue comes up that impacts the area you live in, where you need to contact the legislator, we're going to send you an action alert. Maybe it's a bad deer regulation that's being proposed, or maybe it's an anti-hunting initiative that's sprung up that might be on your ballot in November, or something that your legislators are deciding on. We'll send you an action alert based on your address. And if it's a federal issue, of course, everyone will get it. And then on top of the action alerts where you can participate in that political process, we send out a weekly newsletter. Every week it comes out like clockwork, every Wednesday at 8 a.m. in your inbox. And every week you're going to get a poll. We'll ask you a question about a certain aspect of deer management or hunting, which is very important because we pass this information on to decision makers and use it to help guide what we're doing. But there's also all kinds of deer news from across the country in there, and we try to keep it somewhat, some of it's just straight news stories, and some of it's kind of more lighthearted, fun stuff. But it's kind of cool to every week get a newsletter in your inbox that's just full of deer information going on across the country. It gives you a chance, something to read, and we've got some videos and things in there. And, than that, our Facebook page is very active, and we're active on Twitter and Instagram as well. So we're just, as we talked about earlier, trying to gain that momentum and get more members, because we have to influence policy, and that political science is more important than the biological science these days.
Right. Yep. I am a member of the NDA, and I do subscribe to your newsletter. And I got to say, it's very informative and interesting. And we actually, our news segment, oftentimes we're alerted to some of the issues or some of the news stories through your newsletter, which then ends up as a news story on our show. So it's great. It's that good. It really is.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I do a lot of writing on our website on issues myself too. Now that we've got the white website up there, so we get into some more detailed stuff that's not even in the newsletter. So go into our Facebook page and our website there's a lot of good information there to help keep you informed.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dusty, and he's going to hit you with 10 rapid fire questions.
Are you ready?
This ought to be fun. I think so. We'll try it.
Yeah, and we haven't asked you these questions before. Is that correct, Nick?
That is correct. Actually, I'm a little nervous about this.
You should be.
That's what makes it interesting. These are just random questions, and we're going to go and rapid fire. What's your number one hunting tip?
Hunt the wind.
What's the
wind in your face?
What's the one thing that you can't hunt without?
Sadly, my cell phone.
That's different.
Yeah.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Overreaction by celebrity hunters.
Overreaction.
Smoked them, booyah, smoked them, and smackdown, and all that crap.
Oh, right. Gotcha.
Yeah, gotcha. How old are you today, Nick?
42.
What would the 42-year-old Nick tell the 21-year-old Nick, knowing what you know today?
Slow down and smell the roses a little bit. Life's not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Good answer. You meet a stranger that asks, "What do you do for a living?" How do you respond to that?
Happens all the time. I usually start with, I work in the outdoors industry, and my focus is on deer and deer management. When they look at me funny, I said, the ones that probably eat your flowers. You can tell immediately if they're a hunter or not.
Yeah. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
This morning I had blueberry oatmeal.
Very good. You get your own billboard with a blank canvas. What would it say?
Oh, man. A billboard with a blank canvas. That's a tough one. You got me on that one. A billboard with a blank canvas.
It could say anything you want it to say.
Let's say it's a pretend it's a hashtag. What would your hashtag be?
Hashtag would probably be persistence.
Gotcha.
Excellent. That's a good one.
I say the word successful to you. Who's the first person that comes to mind and why?
Successful. First person that comes to mind. Successful. I guess I'm gonna take the easy way out, and I'm gonna say my parents for raising 3 wild kids and keeping us out of trouble.
That's a great answer, really.
That's a great answer.
What's the day in the life of you look like?
Okay, so a typical day is I'm usually I'll use today was a pretty typical day. I went out this morning at daylight and ran 5 miles. The weather was iffy, so it is hunting season here in Ohio, so I opted not to hunt because of the weather. Came back, showered, had my coffee on my desk, of course, kissed my wife goodbye as she went to work this morning, and had my dogs at my feet while I started tapping away on the email at NDA and working on NDA issues. Took a break at lunchtime, had lunch, shot a few arrows at lunchtime. I work out of my house, which has its benefits. That's not uncommon for me to do those, shoot a little bit. And then back to it. Spent about a half hour talking to a DC lobbyist working on some deer issues and writing a new article for the NDA website. So that's a somewhat typical day for me.
What's a deer hunting day in Nick's life look like?
So I'll go to more of like a rut day. I used to do a lot of all-day sits, daylight to dark. I don't do that anymore. I think probably more harm than good, actually. But so I'll go. But the farm I hunt is about 40 minutes away, so I'll drive out. Be in my stand before daylight. I'll usually the best time in my view during the rut to be in the woods is probably between 8:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. When those big bucks are up scent checking bedded does. So I'll probably stay in my stand till about 11, climb down, grab some lunch briefly, and then try to get back out on stand. I just think that little break is important in there. It's good for your mind, and it's good to not have that scent bubble building up in the area you're sitting. So I'll usually switch stands and then hunt an evening spot during the rut. Now, if it's winter, I don't usually do mornings, which is ironic because that's how I killed curfew. I focus more on evenings when deer movement's better. But I would say a typical winter hunt would be head out about 4 hours before dark gets situated and wait for the deer movement.
Sounds like a great day to me.
Sounds like a fantastic day.
Yeah, you did great with the 10 rapid fire questions.
There it is. Good job, Nick. Nick, what?
I survived.
Give us the website one more time if we wanted to sign up, if we're not members right now with the National Deer Alliance.
Yep, nationaldeeralliance.com. If you forget that, just type in Deer Alliance in your search bar, and you'll probably find it that way as well. Gotcha. And I would just tell people I'm very accessible. Email me directly. That information's on the website. You can call the office number. If I'm not here, I'll call you back. And like I said, not everyone is accessible all the time, but I try to be. So I'm happy to answer your questions.
Very cool. Nick, this has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on our show, and I've enjoyed listening to talk anywhere from where you grew up to all the places you've worked and where you are today with the NDA and the CEO of the NDA, all these acronyms that we have, and listening to your deer story about curfew. Fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic. So I got to say thank you.
No, thank you. It was really my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. So thank you very much.
Well, that was pretty darn cool. It's good to hear that the CEO of this group is, in fact, a diehard deer hunting fan, and that he takes deer hunting seriously, and he has tremendous respect for the whitetail, and also represents an organization that helps to promote and get the message out to the members about upcoming legislation that might affect your deer hunting in years to come. So I think it is a useful organization. I think it's a good idea to join it. It is free to join, and it's a lot like what I equate to the NRA, giving us updates on what legislation might be coming down the pike that will affect our gun ownership, and that what you can do about it to get the vote to sway in the way in which you would like it to be. So I would encourage you to check out the National Deer Alliance. So thanks to Nick Pinizzotto for joining us and explaining what that is all about and telling us a darn good deer hunting story. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Yeah, we do, Jay.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
We're focusing a little bit on safety this week, and and I'm going to talk about something that could be super bad. Like it could mess up your hunting season, and it's often not even focused upon. I must say that screw-in steps, like steps that you screw into the tree and climb up, man, they're bad news.
Why do you say that?
When I say bad news, I'm saying that if you get up there and you slip and fall, maybe your safety harness will catch you. But it's think if you hook one of them metal steps into your guts. What's it going to do, Jay?
It's going to rip it open.
It's going to tear your guts out.
Right.
You fall when you got metal steps screwed into the tree 4 or 5 inches. You fall on that, it's going to rip right through your clothes and get into your skin and literally rip your guts out.
Right.
People, you got to be careful with screw-in steps.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the force that might be coming down upon one of those things, and it's basically a spike. It's like a knife sticking out the side of the tree with a blunt end, and it'll tear you up.
For sure.
Yep.
Just be careful. If you're using screw-in steps, maybe get them on the back side of the tree in case something happens. But I tell you, if you ever fall and you got screw-in climbing steps, it's going to rip you up if you get hooked in them.
Might want to consider something else. Yep.
That's my Chubby Times tip of the week, Jay.
Great tip. We love safety tips on the show to keep all of our diehard deer hunting fans safe and getting and able to hunt next year. So it's been a great show. I really appreciate Nick for joining us on the Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. Thank you to Morsa Sporting Goods for sponsoring the Chubby Tines Tip of the Week. I also wanted to thank Scent Lok Enforcer and the Euro Hanger for sponsoring the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Jay, you can find me at facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. I try to respond to everybody that shoots in an email. I'm glad to talk with you. And got any questions or maybe a guest that you might think would be great content for our listeners, shoot us an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. And also look me up on Instagram @ChasingAntler. Jay, where can people reach out to you and you now on the mic?
The best place, like you, is to email me, jay@bigbuckregistry.com. I respond to all emails, and certainly that's one of the best ways to send in a picture of your big buck if you'd like to be featured on the flagship Facebook page. If you'd like some more information about how to get featured, go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all the instructions will be right there on how to be featured and show off your harvest for the year, your kill for the year. And you can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and it's the universal. It's facebook.com/Big Buck Registry. You can follow suit with the other social media places. You can listen to the show not just on iTunes or not just directly. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Google Play. We have an app that you can use on your iPhone, which is bigbuckregistry.com/app. It is free to download, and it'll give you all the pertinent information that you need about the shows that are coming out. And it's also bigbuckregistry.com/G-app if you have like an Android. You can find us also on Stitcher and Blueberry and pretty much any other place that podcast directories are listed. So those are all the places we're hanging out. That's how to get hold of us. It's been another amazing show, Dusty. And I think it's time to go. My name is Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.